This is a quote, well, I guess I can say now. So I talked to a bunch of people for quotes that fit into themes throughout this talk, and I can read it out loud for anyone who doesn't want to read. Feel free to use discreetly. I know that since I am in academia, calling attention to these things at such an early stage in my career is potentially a career-ending move. And I just wanted to put this quote up there, and I had similar quotes to say why I wanted to give this talk. I wanted to provide an open discussion so that many people feeling like this, who think they're the only ones feeling like this as a woman or a minority, or both, because it is all-encompassing, that they're not alone, and that there are lots of people at NACIS who are willing to talk to them about it, and people already are talking about it at NACIS. And I wanted to talk about it to officially give a talk. And I'm really nervous, sorry. And a month or so ago, I saw an article that was accompanied by a video by NPR that honestly I thought would be the best way to introduce what I'm going to talk about, because it's really generalized but also completely removed from humans. So it's kind of like a nice example. And it's like a minute and a half long, but it's also entertaining, probably more entertaining than me, so hopefully the sound works. No! It's not even coming out of my computer. Well, I can read it, but they say funny things in the background. Okay, well, so essentially, there is a scientist who wanted to, oh, that's fast-forwarded. Already technological problems. So there was a research psychologist who did research via setting up signs next to some rats. And some rats got signs that said really good things, and other rats got things that said really negative things. And I'm fairly certain rats don't understand English or whatever language it may have been. I didn't check. And he had them all set up with these signs. And then he told his scientists and experimenters to run these rats through a maze. And there's not really smart or dumb rats, because they're all your average run-of-the-mill rats, supposedly, unless they like mutated them and they're all superheroes somewhere that we don't know about. And it's gonna just show an animation of a maze. And basically these smart rats did twice as good as the dumb rats, even though the dumb rats weren't actually dumb. I'm just gonna wait for it to catch up with me. I talk fast sometimes, sorry. And essentially what NPR was talking about is how the way subtle expectations or subconscious expectations happen because of interactions or assumptions. You end up treating things or people differently based off of initial assumptions from what you see, and that's kind of what they're explaining here. So they're talking about how people were treating the smarter rats with more care, and that's kind of how ultimately, subtly, the smart rats did better, because they felt better through those actions. And the video goes on. I can share this link so people can watch it if they want to hear the funny conversations that are actually happening and not me. But essentially they just talk about how the way people treat each other based off of appearance or assumptions that you read and everything else is a form of othering, which othering is basically treating people differently than the standard. And othering is different across society and across different cultures. So I try to find a really general definition for it. And othering can cause microaggressions, which can be really hostile or just cause negative messages. Even like some people other people on purpose, and some people don't realize they're othering people on purpose, like the video. And I'm going to talk about othering based off appearance, specifically women and minorities, because appearance is really obvious in both those cases in humans. And the most obvious othering and microaggressions that happens, that is constantly discussed, especially now and forever, well, hopefully not forever, is racism. And I just had some examples of stuff up there. And what I really wanted to talk about was the not obvious stuff, the stuff that that video was pointing out that unfortunately you guys didn't hear the audio for, is that subtle, subconscious, sociocultural, historic norm things that happened before can affect the way we treat each other, and those receiving the microaggressions or the othering can feel lesser. They feel like they don't belong or inferior, which all ties into kind of like impostor syndrome, which I think a lot of people can feel in general. It's not like specific just to women and minorities, but a lot of women and minorities in tech and in cartography and in the spatial field may feel it because we work around a lot of men and a lot of white men, which is fine. Here I already mentioned that I was going to give anonymous quotes. This is my first anonymous quote based off of appearance. This is a minority guy, and I'll just read it. Recently at a major conference I was presenting at, a professor who I respected and who I considered to be one of the old guards of cartography, and someone I had hoped I would possibly have an opportunity to collaborate with one day, came to my talk and even stuck around until the end to chat with me. And he said, "Why is your English so good?" And at that moment, it felt a bit like a punch in the gut, like all of my hard work didn't really matter, like no matter how groundbreaking my research was or how many degrees or awards I have, I would always just be the other that didn't really belong. And it's kind of another way to look at it is judging a book by its cover. And in terms of women, a lot of women have to worry about being perceived based on our aesthetics. So a woman I talked to who was hired because she was a cartographer and she was getting hired because she had cartographic skills, the owner of the particular place she was working for said he wanted to open a store map front and asked her if she could be at the front of the store because she was pretty, or is pretty, and he didn't ask her if she had store management skills or anything like that. He just asked her because he thought she was pretty and he wanted a pretty face at the front of the store. And someone said that during class, in a geography grad class, a male classmate had to miss class during some presentations, but he had asked who would be presenting the following week. And this woman was one of the people presenting the following week. And the student said, "That's okay, anonymous is more fun to look at," which in itself is hard to deal with in a classroom situation. And the professor laughed and then looked right at her and said, "Yeah, I know," which is an extra layer of feeling othered, and also because it was an authoritative figure. And as an example of someone at a conference, a man at a conference social event asked me who I was there with. He said, "I was too pretty to be there for the conference, so I must have been at the party with my boyfriend. I presented earlier that day about a workflow I wrote for interpolating river bathymetry." To him, I wasn't qualified because of what I looked like. Hours of work be damned. And she followed with saying, "You cannot win as a woman. If you try to be trendy or dress up, you are assumed to be unintelligent. If you don't dress up or don't care about trends, you are looked over," which I think many have experienced, unfortunately. And someone else said that a comment in their conference feedback forum said that their voice was unacceptable for a conference. I actually didn't follow up about what her voice sounded like, obviously, because it didn't matter. I assume it was high-pitched, not that it matters. And then this is something that I experienced based off of being a woman. So I want to preface this. Again, I want to circle back and saying that a lot of stuff that happens was actually said maybe in a demeaning way, but there's also instances where it was possibly subconscious and they didn't really think about what they were saying. And like the video where the scientists weren't really thinking about how they were treating the rats and they only thought about it after. The quote that I will read was said to me by someone who is actually, like, he's someone I know, he's an amazing person, he's one of my friends. He walked into the room, it was soon after I had rebranded maps at my old job. There were 4 GIS analysts sitting there who were all guys, and they were on my team. And he first said the new maps looked really amazing, which obviously made me feel really good. Sorry. Sorry, I'm just like really stressed. I get emotional and stressed. And then he said, "Thank God we finally have someone with a feminine touch around here." So I'm gonna fast forward because also, I guess I should also say I shouldn't care about crying, but I only care because I'm a woman, because then people will think that I'm not a nice person. So I mostly just put that in there because I knew I was going to need to laugh for myself, but I knew everyone else would laugh. I am obviously not that feminine, clearly, because I lift heavy things, which I also didn't agree with. I think femininity and masculinity is dumb, and I hate those adjectives. But to circle back to the quote, that was one of the first really impactful things that I experienced. Well, there was another time before that I'll get to later in the talk. But like that was the guy who said it to me was someone I heavily respected, who I still respect, who's an amazing person. And when it comes from someone who you respect so much, I think it's tougher for anyone to hear that kind of thing. And at first, it's just like, oh, it's a compliment. Why do I care so much? But it's not a compliment because, again, oh crap, ignore that. Why did this happen to me this morning too? Well, sorry. I just had another joke slide where while I can be feminine, I'm also told by people that I have masculine energy. That's just a joke. This is actually from when we were protesting in high school because the high school said guys couldn't wear dresses, which is weird, right? The high school saying guys couldn't wear dresses. I responded by saying, I slowly turned around in my chair because I knew I wanted to say something, but say it in such a way where he would realize that what he said was wrong and also not be angry, because I knew that he didn't mean to say it, which is also why it's really hard. And that's why I wanted to give this talk. Like, so people really think about sometimes when people react and they see that someone's reacting and seeing that someone thought it was mean or hurtful, often people think like, oh, well, it's just like fine, like whatever. But really, like, there's a lot of stuff that adds up together, like a lot of microaggressions and a lot of experiences of othering for women and minorities where one thing can actually be a lot of things. And I just told him that I had studied it for 6 years and worked in making maps for 3 years, so I figured it was, that was why. And then he like said sorry and stuff. But he was like willing to talk about it afterwards, which was really great. And so that leads into, that made me think, began a lot of thinking for me. I do a lot of pondering in my free time, probably too much. I overthink everything, but it's good because it makes me think about lots of stuff. I think lots of geographers do that. You think about how cultural things affect everything. And I was just thinking how I have often experienced design being perceived as feminine, and how people sometimes dismiss like graphic designers, or like say, oh, it's just pretty, or that didn't take that long, that like, oh, the graphic designer will like do something really fast, or like freelancers in graphic design often are told, like, do you just want to do it for free? It'll be good for your portfolio, like acting like it's not that much work. And I mean, historically, a lot of women's work is devalued. This is about nursing. Well, the whole article was about nursing. I'm not sure. It talks about service sector stuff there as well. And I started like digging into graphic design research. Like I knew someone, like there must be a lot of research on this. I just didn't know like where to start for finding research. And then I found this piece that actually was dedicated, and I can share this link as well later, to considering the problems of gender and history of graphic design. And for some reason, a lot of graphic design has a feminine character. Even though graphic design is actually predominantly male, it is like heavily male, heavily white male. And art history is known to be male. There's a lot of women who did art historically as well, but all the famous people we learn about growing up tend to be male. Like Picasso from my earlier talk. I highlighted female designers are reduced to a specific trait and not treated as truly equal. Also with regard to their choice of style. The more positive evaluation of stylistically feminine works often influence other women who strive for success to fulfill these expectations. So it kind of can be a cyclical thing. Again, how like history can influence current times. And then, so this is the article, again, I'll share it. This is the intro. And this quote really resonated with everything I really wanted to say. The stereotypical dualism whereby women are associated with the body and the decorative, and men with technology and the shaping of nature. The dichotomy of hard versus soft is not unique to design, which I also think we know. But there's a complex relationship between disciplinaries and culture and gender. It is different across space. And there, again, going back to design as feminine, I've had men tell me variants of this, because I have talked about this fairly often the past few years. The bias you rant against is cartography not being perceived as a science. That is an othering bias I too encounter regularly. I also get talked down to and teased for working in the design field. It isn't just women who are talked down to because of design, but that's because of the historical complexity of how design has been perceived as feminine, even though people aren't like, it's just design and think like, oh, it's because it's feminine. It's just like this subconscious thing that I am now bringing to the fore. And so that leads into cartography sometimes being perceived as feminine. And to be clear, I don't think design or cartography are feminine or masculine. I think they're just spaces of work and everyone can do whatever they want in any which way, and I think it's dumb to define it by any gendered adjectives. But unfortunately, a lot of adjectives have that kind of historical meaning and perception. Soft versus hard, decorative versus complex, feminine versus masculine adjectives. That's me when I had different hair color. In Mongolia, that's me in Mongolia. So I was in Mongolia, as Rosemary mentioned, and I was working there, and that's just from my resume. And basically, she already said everything I did, which I forgot was going to happen. But that's just an example of some of the work I did. I wrote out like stuff that I needed to figure out how to represent while listening to like what people were telling me needed to happen. And then that's like the end of when I was trying to figure out how we could best double check each other's work to make sure everything that went out was perfect. And I happened to be working on my master's thesis at the time, which conveniently was visually located right next to my work in Mongolia on my resume. And for those who don't know, my thesis was about defining aesthetics in historical cartography, specifically pre-1900 maps, more specifically lithograph, woodblock, and copperplate maps. And that's just an example. And at the end of the Mongolia experience, it was an experience because I was working like 20-hour days, with everyone though. Like it was just like really stressful. It was like 12 hours later and I was tired all the time. But at the end, we all celebrated and we went out to dinner and someone was just like asking me like what I did. And I said like, oh, I'm like working on my thesis right now actually, like, and it was like in the starting stages, so I barely knew how to describe it. At the time, I didn't know that it was woodblock and lithograph and copperplate. I just knew I wanted to define styles in historical maps. And they like, it's often hard to talk to people, as we all know, about maps and things, but the person I was talking to was like, oh my God, like Lord of the Rings maps, which like, we definitely saw Lord of the Rings maps a lot at this conference, I feel like, or maybe it was just PC, I don't know. So it ended up being like a perfect example. And he thought so, and so I was talking to him about it and I geeked out, and then someone else interrupted me. It was someone who understood spatial stuff a little, and he said that the Lord of the Rings maps was stupid because it was made up. And then he said that I didn't need to be defining styles and that no one cared and that it was dumb to be doing that because no one needed to do that anymore because technology. And I mean, he said many specific things that I don't remember, but that was the essence. And he basically interrupted the conversation and essentially like dismissed me so entirely that the person who had been talking to me just like thought it didn't matter. Like he basically shit on my thesis. Sorry, I swore. But then it was just like, I didn't know how to respond or what to do, and I was exhausted, and so I just didn't do anything. And then I just remember sitting on the plane, like on the way back, like that stuck to me really hard because that was such an impactful experience in general. And then to end it like that, I think it affected me a lot more than I knew, which is good though, because then I've been like constantly thinking about it for like 5 years. So now I'm giving a talk about it. And it just led back to how he perceived it as soft and decorative, and ultimately to circle back to the feminine, which circles back to women. And I don't know why he did it. Like, I don't think it was because he's like, you're a girl, or like, it's feminine, so it sucks. But, I did it again, sorry. I really don't know why it goes to the last slide. But leading into another experience I had about being a cartographer and how I like started wondering like how people perceived cartography in a dismissive way, and knowing that other people had experienced it, both men and women. I went for FOSS4G for the first time, free open source software for geography, for those who don't know, a few years ago, which it was an amazing experience. Everyone was really awesome, like the talks are great. It's such a great conference to go to. I was a GIS analyst on paper, so a lot of people didn't know I was also a cartographer. So I experienced this like thing where I was like going incognito, hearing people negatively talk about cartography. Like every day I was at the conference, and it was weird because I didn't expect it. I had always experienced such acceptance in the spatial field, but I also happened to be a cartographer, so I probably always was surrounded by cartographers. And the person who I was talking to was a friend I already knew, actually, from outside of the conference, and he didn't know I was a cartographer. He just said, I don't know, they don't do anything, they just make things look pretty, which is why I had Rosemary do quotes in the chest. But he also said, I don't know what they're doing, as it always is. And then he like waved his hand dismissively quite a few times, and I just stood there like not knowing what to say. And there's this thing I do, which my friends who know me pretty well, who are sitting here, know that I do this, where I like ask people a lot of questions when they say something that I want to eventually ask a real question at the end to make sure that I like have already determined what their actual opinion is. So I asked him a bunch of questions about what he actually thought cartography was, and essentially he didn't really know. So then I like finally just like, did you know that I'm a cartographer? And then I started telling him what cartography was, and he didn't know, and that has happened so often, and it really confuses me that a lot of spatial people don't really know what cartography is, or like how complicated the process is. So I always encourage people to come to NACIS when that happens, because it's great. And it was just an example of this. This was FOSS4G, and I did my thing where I tweeted about it, and people came to talk to me after that. It was before like the final dinner, and a bunch of people came to talk to me, which was really great. So I clearly have been thinking about this stuff a lot. At the time, I just didn't think about it as extensively as this talk, and that's why this talk is now and not 2 years ago in 2016. And so that kind of leads into expertise, like expertise as a cartographer, expertise as a woman. Someone I was talking to, she said, I see all my strengths as skills I've worked to acquire, and I see the other areas as opportunity for personal growth, which I think is how everyone views their career in general, and I also agree. But we were chatting, and this is a quote from me, I often find myself, and many other people I've talked to for this as well said something along the same lines, where like we're constantly having to like answer questions that people purposely ask in a certain way to make sure we know, like to make sure that we actually know what we're doing. Like they're like testing if we're actually experts instead of accepting us as experts, which I think also a lot of us are really used to. And sometimes like it's when people don't do that, I've gotten really surprised. And I don't know if it's just because I'm older now, so I started being like, wait, I'm not like over-explaining my abilities right now. They actually like accept me. Like I feel like this started happening in the past year or so, and I don't really know what the difference is. And I don't have an answer for that because I wasn't actually actively like taking research my whole life. But I think this is like something that a lot of women and minorities experience. And I know like a lot of people experience this in general. Like when we're younger, a lot of people don't believe we know things, like in college and stuff, but, which is true in many cases. Like experience means a lot of stuff, but you also still know some things. Like I knew how to use ArcMap in college. Like I was getting questions about like ArcMap and stuff, and people like making sure I knew how to use it, and I was just like, yes, I know what that is. And then a woman I was talking to said, it does feel like there's a default cartographer or almost any other professional, like this can be in lots of different like tech fields, and anyone who deviates from that has to work harder to prove they belong. And I also have experienced that, and we commiserated about that for a while. And a different person, this is the same person who talked to me about conferences from previous slides. She said if she deviated from her area of expertise, it was much less likely for her to get her talk accepted, but she told me that she noticed that didn't happen with a lot of her other peers who were men. And at the talk itself, it's really like relating to expertise, she would often get questions that were more like questions about questioning her authority as an expert, like shouldn't you have done it this way, or have you read this instead of what you did? And the same person has a name that's really ambiguous. It could be a male name or a female name, and for a long time she just had her brand's logo as a photo. She did it on purpose, which was honestly really smart of her. Like when she told me, I was like, that's amazing, I wouldn't have ever thought of that. But my name's Vanessa, so it's obvious I'm a girl. And she said that her digital disguise often left her to, when she actually met people at conferences or in meetings and whatever, she saw their like a clear confusion at first, and then like acceptance that she wasn't a man as they had assumed. Or that's what she thinks. I mean, she didn't actually ask them, but like, it seems like a solid assumption. And then she also like added a bit like, does she feel bad about masquerading herself? And she said that she thinks everyone should use whatever they can to break down barriers until everyone like lets everyone in. And someone else said, I always work way more than what is required because there is always this like beneath the surface question of, do I need to work harder to be taken seriously? I think I have to work harder to be taken seriously. I need to work hard and do all the extra stuff in case I get asked questions to make sure I'm taken seriously. And then circling back to the person who was asked if their English is so good, it kind of relates to a struggle for recognition. And all of that relates to imposter syndrome. And I maybe should speak faster because you guys have been sitting here for half an hour. I'm really sorry. Normally I speak really fast, but I guess I slow down a little. I'm stressed. But I feel like I've covered imposter syndrome pretty well at this point. I'm sorry I don't have more funny slides. So like fast forward through this bit. On my resume for a while, I actually didn't put like everything I did in Mongolia on my resume, which is like obviously crazy. But in my head, I think I'd psyched myself out so much, maybe subconsciously, about what had happened. I like somehow had dismissed myself, which is like crazy. And I wanted to give that example because I had major imposter syndrome, where I literally took like a thing that's like really good to have on your resume and I didn't put it on there. And like I said there, that was dumb. So solutions. A self-solution is a lot of like introspection, I guess. Like assessing your skill sets and knowing what you're good at, that can be really hard. When you're in school, it can be really hard to assess your skill sets because you're only aware of what you've been taught. But I think that's why it's really useful to go to conferences. If you can't go to conferences, go to map time. If you don't have map time, like we have such a great community of people in the spatial space, spatial sphere. Twitter is like so great. Like I think there's so many people at this conference that even if you don't go to this conference, if you reach out to us, if you reach out to me, I will talk to you. I will happily like help you figure out what you think your skill sets are. But I think NACIS is such a great space. It's where I figured out where I really fit in my skills. Because before I really didn't understand. And it also, like as I've said before in other talks and places, NACIS is technically where I figured out why I like doing cartography. So NACIS is my jam. Don't let others define you, also really hard, but I think if you really like internally know what you're good at, you therefore will not even allow others to say you're not good at this. And that's also a skill you have to learn. It's another skill. And obviously, like when people talk down to you and dismiss you, you're gonna feel like depending on the situation, you can't always, like you won't always be able to tell them no. But like at least knowing internally who you are as a cartographer or GIS analyst or any other career space is really helpful. I don't know if that made sense. Practice selling yourself and your skill sets, like practice with your friends, do practice interviews. Oh, I already said this, but go to amazing conferences like NACIS where you learn and grow and help others learn and grow. Give talks, give workshops. Like talks are crazy, especially this one, because I cried. But you're surrounded by incredibly supportive people, especially at NACIS, which is also why I feel comfortable giving this talk, who love sharing and teaching. I already said that. Also, it's such a growing and shifting field. Like, we're all always learning and growing. We're all always learning and growing, so you definitely should feel okay about constantly learning and growing and talking about not knowing things, because we all don't know stuff. Speak out, again, like talk to people you made friends with here. You can talk to me if you don't want to talk to anyone else. I promise I'll talk to you. Don't just internalize. I obviously did this a lot since I didn't put Mongolia on my resume for some reason. I promise you're not the only one. And I guess on the flip side, for people who haven't experienced this as much, it's not just men who haven't experienced it. There are many people who haven't experienced being othered. There's like, I just wanted to give suggestions on like how to not be dismissive, I guess, which I don't think is anyone here, but just in case. And it's great to just be like, I've experienced getting talked down to, because obviously everyone has. I understand where you're coming from, because I have also been hurt, something bothers me, but I don't understand your particular experience, but I'd love to hear and figure out how to understand it from your perspective, cartographic perspective. And why this matters, well, as I've said, I talked to a bunch of people who have obviously experienced stuff, but the people who talk to me, who are people, I won't tell you who they are, but they're all very well-established people in this community. People, like a lot of people are too afraid to talk about it because of this, because they're worried about professional repercussions, which is unfortunately true. The thing that made me really nervous, I talk about stuff a lot. If you follow me on Twitter, you might sometimes see my rants about everything in life. But I got really nervous because people started messaging, sorry. Oh, I thought I was done. People started messaging me and telling me I was brave, and like that freaked me out because I didn't think it was such a big deal at the time. And like this whole week, people have been coming up to me and telling me I'm brave and courageous, and like I don't think I am. I don't want to be braver being considered myself, which it's obviously okay, people can tell me whatever they want, but I want it to be that we don't have to be brave to discuss this openly. I want everyone to feel okay with talking about what may be bothering them, if it's othering or other stuff, especially in our community. And now I'm done, I'm sorry, you've been here for probably like 40 minutes.
I think that's the first standing O after a NACIS talk. Commend both of our speakers, Jeff and Vanessa. Commend you guys all as an audience. You guys are amazing. I'm sure people have some questions, so Vicky.
So that was fantastic.
Yes.
Loved it. Cried along with you. You touched on this a little bit. What are some tangible actions that the straight white men in our community can take?
I would say there's a lot. Well, when you see stuff happening, what are some tangible actions that straight white men can take? What was the last part? In our community to help.
It shouldn't be all on us.
Yes, it's not all on us. When you see something, say something. Like when you see a bag in an airport. But actually, if you notice something happening, and I think this is very relevant to stuff right now. I've seen a lot of people talking about it lately, which is extra why I was nervous about this talk. If you're a guy, be okay with being vulnerable and knowing that you might be uncomfortable in the conversation you're going to have. If you're feeling like you notice something happening, feel free to step in, because you technically inherently have, unfortunately, more power, usually, socially and cultural history and blah. Also, though, the other thing is just, really, you will be uncomfortable talking about a lot of, it's not just, women topics and minorities. I talk about a lot of stuff with a lot of people generally, and I know a lot of things I talk about with people is really uncomfortable, and I promise if someone's coming up to you to talk about something that is uncomfortable, they're more uncomfortable than you. If you're feeling uncomfortable, note that and say, I feel uncomfortable, but I want to talk about this. It's okay to admit that you're uncomfortable. It's okay to talk about it openly. Did that answer your question?